Our Story, 77 Hours That Tested Our Friendship and Our Faith by the Quecreek Miners As Told to Jeff Goodell. The Last Cut. At about 9 p.m. on Wednesday, July 24th, 2002, Mark Popernak, who goes by the nickname Mo, was a mile and a half underground in the Quecreek mine outside of Somerset, Pennsylvania. As was often the case, Mo was at the controls of a big machine called a miner. A long, low, heavy tractor with a wide carbide steel cutter head up front that looks like an enormous buzz saw. The cutter head rips through the coal seam as easily as a weed whacker through grass, pulverizing the ancient black rock and sending it shooting out the back of the miner onto the waiting shuttle cars. The miner is the biggest, baddest machine in the mine, an earth-devouring monster. As an operator of the miner, Mo is among the best in the business. He's 41, wiry and strong, with short, dark hair, an angular face, and shrewd blue eyes. He's a third-generation coal miner and has worked underground for more than 20 years, many of them running the miner. He knows all the machine's tricks. He can tell by the sound of the miner's carbide teeth digging into the coal seam if he is cutting too high or too low. He knows how to guide the machine smoothly and efficiently across the face of the coal, getting the maximum cut from the least mechanical movements. In Mo's hands, the 60-ton machine moves with economy and speed, in a manner that could almost be described as graceful. That night, as usual, Mo operated the miner from a remote control box hanging around his neck. He stood about 20 feet behind the machine and just off to the right. Miner operators are required to keep their distance from the machine for their own safety. You never know when the roof is going to collapse or when the cutter head is going to rip onto something unexpected. An old well, a shelf of impenetrable rock. Strange things happen in coal mines, and many of them happen in the vicinity of the miner. That night, however, nothing strange was going on. The crew, Mo was one of the 9 guys in that section of the mine, had been hitting a lot of water when they drilled support holes in the roof of the mine. But most of the guys saw that as more of a hassle than a danger sign. A lot of mines are wet. Using a pair of levers on the remote control, Mo sent the miner digging into the coal seam for one last cut before he moved on to another section. Dennis Hall, whom the guys on the crew all called Harpo, had just pulled in behind him with a shuttle car, a small underground dump truck, to haul away his last load. Mo: everything was going fine. I was cutting into the face loading coal. Harper was right there in his shuttle car. I looked at his car, and I'm thinking I need one more carful. Then I'm done with this cut. Then Harper turned around in his seat, and I looked back at the miner. I did a double take. The front end of the miner is illuminated pretty good, but for some reason I couldn't see the lights on the miner. First I thought I lost power. I looked at the methane monitor on the back, and it was still lit up. I looked back at Harpo and looked back at the miner, and son of a bitch, holy fuck, what is it? I yelled. Harpo, get the fuck out of here now! Then I just jumped back into the crosscut away from a wall of water that was coming at me. Although Mo didn't realize it at the time, he had just cut into an abandoned mine, and like most old mines, it was flooded with water. A lot of it. Over the years, the water had filled up about 7 miles of underground rooms and tunnels. In effect, the old mine had been transformed into an enormous underground lake. When Mo ripped a hole in its wall, 70 million gallons of water suddenly gushed through a 6-foot-wide gash. It was like poking a hole in Hoover Dam. Mo: I've got 8 buddies in this mine with me, I thought, and we're all going to die. Chapter 2, Coal Country. Somerset is about 2 hours east of Pittsburgh, in the heart of southern Pennsylvania coal fields. It's a small town set amid softly rolling hills with an imposing copper-domed courthouse and streets of tidy brick houses that were built for mine and foundry workers around the turn of the century. It's the kind of town that might have been described as bustling 50 years ago. but now feels a little forlorn and is best known for its craft festivals, its county fair, and is the crash site of Flight 93, which went down in a field 13 miles outside of Somerset on September 11, 2001. The most prominent landmark in town is the inn at Georgian Place, a restored brick mansion that sits high on a bluff just off the turnpike, surrounded by shuttered factory outlet stores. It is the former home of D.B. Zimmerman, one of the region's most prosperous coal barons, a man who made millions digging this ancient black rock out of the ground and selling it to factories and steel plants. Like many industrial-age coal barons, Zimmerman was not exactly beloved by the men who worked for him. In fact, in 1911, an angry employee slashed him with a knife and nearly killed him. The mansion, built in 1915, is a reminder of the tremendous wealth generated by the black rocks that were pulled out of these hills, as well as the enormous gap that has always existed in the coal industry between those who work in the mines and those who own them. After coal's heyday in the 1920s and 30s, the industry fell on hard times in the 1950s and 60s, when nuclear power and oil seemed to be the energy sources of the future. In Somerset, the mansions were abandoned, jobs were cut, and mines closed down. Coal seemed to be a dying industry, a relic of the industrial age, soon to be replaced by cleaner sources of power. Then, in the 1970s, thanks to the double whammy of the 3 Mile Island meltdown and the oil crisis in the Middle East, coal was once again America's fuel source of choice. Overnight, Somerset was jumping again. Coal industry executives helicoptered in from Pittsburgh for lunch. Lear jets lined up on the tarmac at the Somerset airport. Ladies from Pittsburgh would arrive in restaurants wearing furs and diamond tiaras, said John Knupp, who was the general manager of the Ramada Inn in Somerset at the time. You could smell the money. Of course, the men in the mines didn't share in this bonanza, but they were making a good living. The mines were mostly unionized, and the coal companies needed every man they could find. If you had a strong back and didn't mind getting dirty, you were hired. In the 1980s, the party ended. The U.S. steel industry, a large user of coal, shut down numerous plants. The power industry, prompted by new laws that address the environmental and public health costs of burning coal, switched to natural gas. The price of coal plummeted, and the fortunes of Somerset sagged. The United States still burns almost 1 billion tons of coal a year, but most of it comes from big strip mines in West Virginia, Kentucky, and Wyoming. You can see symbols of the coal industry's decline all over Somerset County. The hills are full of rusting mining equipment and abandoned coal pits, unemployed young men and old men on respirators. In 1907, nearly 352,000 men worked in the Pennsylvania mines. Today, there are only about 8,600 in the state. Coal mining, particularly laborious underground coal mining, is, as one of the Quecreek miners put it, a dying beast. The Quecreek mine, about 6 miles north of Somerset, is a typical mine for the area. Small, tight, and profitable only if everything goes just right. It's operated by Black Wolf Coal Company, which, in a complex financial and legal arrangement common in the industry, is a subsidiary of PBS Coals, Inc., one of the largest coal companies left in the region. The mine opened in the early 2001, after rights to the coal were bought cheap in a tax sale from another mining company. The 60 or so miners employed at Quecreek were intimately familiar with the coal industry's hard times. All they had to do was look at their paychecks. Most of them were making close to what they had been making a decade earlier. Like most mines in the area, Quecreek is non-union. Wages top out at a little over $15 an hour. They'd seen mines close down, their 401ks reduced, their health benefits cut. They knew very well they were not working in a boomtown industry anymore. In fact, most of them were grateful to have a job at all. And like most miners, they bitched and moaned about a lot about their greedy bosses, but many of them loved the work itself. It may be hard to understand why any sane person would want to do this for a living. The industry's safety record has improved in recent years, but coal mining is still among the most dangerous occupations in the United States. But there's something about working deep in the earth, in the darkness, with death hanging above you in creaking hunks of slate, that's both meaningful and challenging in a way that shuffling pixels on a computer screen can never be. Plus, in an economy like Somerset's, there aren't a whole lot of options. $15 an hour in a coal mine beats $7 an hour at Walmart. The crew that headed into the Quecreek mine that July afternoon was a particularly prideful bunch, led by a 44-year-old local boy named Randy Fogel. They were often the top loading crew in the mine, regularly digging out 700 or more tons of coal during an 8-hour shift, an impressive rate of production given the conditions and equipment in the mine. Much of their success and unity, they all admit, was due to Randy's leadership. A third-generation coal miner, Randy had worked in the mines for more than 20 years. He's been both a mine superintendent and a mine supervisor and has seen it all. Cave-ins and collapses, fire and black, damp, broken belts, and lost miners. He drives his crew hard. He likes to threaten to kill guys if they don't get something done fast enough. But he earns the guys' respect because when the work gets rough, when the roof is starting to sag, or when there is water pouring in and conditions are miserable, he's always there with his men, in the thick of it. When you meet Randy, his gifts aren't immediately apparent. He's a big, heavy guy with blue eyes and a mustache, and comes off more like a genial uncle than a tough coal miner, if you ignore the big wad of chewing tobacco under his lip. In fact, to see him moving around his living room in his small, nicely kept home in Garrett, where he lives with his wife Annette and 2 of their 3 kids, he seems like a man ill-suited to coal mining. He moves gracelessly with a noticeable limp. But underground, Randy is a different person. His eyes spark and jump, his limp disappears, and he moves quickly and smoothly in what coal miners call their duck walk, a hunched-over gait that's almost gorilla-like, using a miner's hammer as a walking stick. Randy gets worked up just looking at the roof, a miner's word for the top, or ceiling of a coal mine, and ribs, walls of a mine. He'll talk about the roll and pitch of it for hours. He's so animated and so knowledgeable and confident that you instinctively trust him and would follow him anywhere. Of all the guys on the crew, Randy is probably the closest to his fishing buddy, Mo. They have worked together in mines for years and have spent many hours together casting for pike and bass in nearby lakes. They even took a trip up to northern Ontario recently, flying in on a float plane to a remote lake known for its awesome pike fishing. Mo's 2 boys, Daniel 9 and Lucas 10, are also passionate fishermen. They live in a clean, simple house overlooking a small lake just outside Somerset. Mo's wife Sandy grew up on a lovely farm just down the road, and she still helps milk the cows every day. There's a lot of overlap between farming and mining in Somerset. In fact, another member of Randy's crew, John Unger, who has 28 years underground, always dreamed of quitting the mines and running his own dairy farm. At 52, he's a strong, broad-shouldered guy with a school of hard knocks wisdom that comes from having 2 kids and a wife who has been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. Last summer, after being shuffled from lousy mine to lousy mine, Unger threatened to quit and go milk cows. When he finally got a chance to work with Randy, however, he decided to stick around a while longer. "Randy is my main man," says Unger. The bonds between these guys are often forged by more than just the years they spent together in the mines. Dennis Hall, 49, knew John Unger from the time he was a little boy, when Unger's father was a greenskeeper at the nearby North Fork Country Club, and they have been friends ever since. Hall, who got tagged with the nickname Harpo because he used to have long blonde hair, is a skinny guy with a nervous manner. He, too, comes from solid coal mining stock. His grandfather started in the mines when he was just 6 years old and worked straight through until he was 62. Harpo has a reputation as a hard worker and a guy who likes his beer and tobacco. He's the only one on the crew who both chews and smokes. For fun, he makes high-quality hunting knives and often arrives at the job with hands nicked from the honing blades. The only unmarried guy in the bunch was Bob Pugh, who earned the nickname Boogie when his Italian-born grandfather caught him picking his nose when he was a little boy. Boogie was a football and wrestling star in high school. He married the homecoming queen, and they had 3 kids together before splitting up. At 50, Boogie still has an athlete's build and gait. He's been dating his girlfriend Cindy, who owns a beauty salon just down the road, for 6 years, but he resists marrying or moving in with her, partly because he likes his space. I tend to spread out in bed like Jesus on the cross, he jokes. One of Boogie's grade school friends was Ron Hillman, a.k.a. Hound Dog. They've been buddies for 40 years now. Hound Dog, 49, describes himself as a laid-back country boy, but you could always count on him to speak his mind when things weren't going well in the mind. His wife, Kathy, runs a daycare center out of their home. The kids sometimes call him Sissy just to tease him. The scrappiest guy on the crew was Tom Foy, 52. He's a short, tough, fire-plug of a man with closely cropped gray hair and a mischievous sparkle in his eye. When he was a kid, someone tagged him Tucker, after the nursery rhyme Little Tommy Tucker. The fading tattoos on his arms are reminders of his years as a gunner during the Vietnam War. Now he's a doting grandpa. Tucker also happens to be Blaine Mayhew's father-in-law. Tucker, in fact, helped Blaine get a job in the mines when his old job spraying lawns was just not paying the bills. At 31, Blaine was the youngest guy in the mine and the one with the least experience underground. Only 5 years. He's also the only one not born into a mining family and the only one over 6 feet tall. A handsome buff guy with light blue eyes and high cheekbones. He's a hard worker and a big practical joker, always putting baby powder in someone's helmet or hiding sardine cans in someone's equipment so that it stinks to holy hell. John Filippi, 36, was the next youngest on the crew. He is a solidly built guy with a goatee, heavy eyes, and a gentle smile. He picked up the name Flathead somewhere and was best known on the crew for his amazing ability to nap anytime, anywhere. A few years ago, Flathead and his family had packed up and moved out to Colorado, hoping to make a fresh start. Flathead found a job in a mine, but he hated the remoteness of the place, and they quickly decided they wanted to come back to Somerset County. Randy made sure I had a job when I got back, Flathead says. I don't know what I would have done without him. Quecreek was a fairly standard operation for an underground mine in southwestern Pennsylvania. You enter through a long, low tunnel about 4.5 feet high and 20 feet wide that has been cut out of a grassy hillside. The floor of the mine gently slopes downward. The air is moist and cool, about 55 degrees year-round. The tunnel quickly opens into a broader area called the main section, or the mains for short. This is the beginning of the actual working section of the mine. Quecreek was dug out by a method known as room and pillar mining, in which the coal is removed in a series of rooms or entries with big blocks of coal left in to keep the roof from collapsing. The mains feel less like a tunnel and more like a big confusing maze of black rooms. There are 7 entries at Quecreek, and each one is numbered from left to right. Number 1 entry is at the far left, number 7 at the far right. Running between each entry at roughly 60-foot intervals are crosscuts, which allow access from one entry to the next. The roof height in a mine depends on the thickness of the coal seam. The miners literally follow the coal. At Quecreek, where they were cutting a seam called the Upper Kittening, the roof height varied between 4 and 5 feet. Even Tucker, the shortest guy on the crew, had to stoop. The mains run almost a mile, 5,000 feet into the earth. At the end, a new section juts off to the left. This called, not surprisingly, one left. It's a big, broad corridor virtually identical to the mains, with 7 entries and numerous crosscuts between them. It extends back about 3,000 feet. It was here, at the end of one left, about 1.5 miles from daylight, that Randy and the others were working. There were 9 guys on the crew that night. At the top, of course, was the foreman, Randy, who was in charge of everything going on underground. His job, to put it simply, was to keep the crew alive and loading as much coal as humanly possible. Flathead was the official miner operator, in charge of the 60-ton machine that cuts the coal. Mo was designated as the miner's assistant, although because of his many years of experience, he spent as much time running the miner as Flathead. Boogie and Harpo were the shuttle car operators. ferrying the coal from the back of the miner to the beltway in speedy little electric dump trucks. Hound Dog and Unger were bolters. They operated the low, heavy machine that drills holes in the roof and then spins 4-foot-long bolts up into it to keep the mine from collapsing while the miners work. Finally, there's the scoop, which Blaine operated. The scoop is a low, heavy tractor with a big bucket on the front. After the miner leaves an entry, the scoop operator comes in and cleans up any loose coal. He's also in charge of spreading rock dust on the walls to keep the flammable coal dust down, so that in case of fire, the mine doesn't turn into a giant fireball. Although all this might sound complex, it really isn't. The miner cuts the coal, the shuttle driver hauls it away, the bolters secure the roof, the scoop driver cleans up the mess. Ideally, everyone works together as a team, anticipating one another's actions. When it's going right, it's a symphony of heavy machinery, and for the guys who are part of it, there's even a kind of elegance and beauty to it. In the darkness and noise, you feel deeply connected to your buddies, your machinery, and the earth itself. Of course, when things go wrong, you have another feeling entirely. Chapter 3. A World of Water. That afternoon, Randy and his crew started arriving at the mine a little after 2 p.m. Mo in his spotless forest green Toyota Tacoma, Blaine in his slightly beat-up blue Nissan pickup, Boogie in his big red Ford. They headed into what is euphemistically called the locker room, actually a sagging mobile home outfitted with pegs to hang their clothes and shelves for their boots. Flathead pulled in late as usual. It was a running joke that he was always the last one to arrive. While they razzed Flathead, they suited up. Well-worn long johns, coal-stained blue coveralls, and steel-toed rubber boots. Last to go on were their heavy leather tool belts, which also doubled as dog tags. On each belt, inscribed in a brass plate, are the miner's name and social security number. After a fire or cave-in, at times, the brass plate is the only way to identify a body. When everyone was ready to go, they checked their mining lights, grabbed their battered helmets, mining hammers, and self-rescuers, an awkward canteen-like piece of equipment that in an emergency gives them air to breathe for an hour, and headed down to the pit. Boogie. We drive into the mine on a flat little cart called a man trip. It takes about half an hour to get from the pit where the entrance is to the face where we're cutting. We talk about all kinds of stuff while we're heading down. Sometimes, if it's early in the morning, some of the guys sleep. That day, when we started in on the man trip, John Unger looked at me and said, "Hey, Boog, loan me about $40,000. I said, "What do you mean, John?" He said, "Me and my partner want to get 25 head of cattle in Canada. Heifers already bred. We're kicking it around, and we're going to bring them back here, and we're going to sell them and make like 200 apiece on those cows." I said, 40,000? Yeah, right, you're crazy, man. They figured I'm Sigil. I've got all the money. Well, we're kicking it around, teasing him a little. Unger is a semi-professional farmer, and we tease him about farming like we know more than him. And we piss him off. "I gotta go home and do the back 40, I say. Or, "Hey, John, I baled some hay last night." But Unger gives it back, too. I told him one time, "Yeah, I was hunting and I had to cross this barbed wire." "Hold on, wait a minute," he said. "What did you call it?" "Bob wire," he said. "It's barbed wire. It ain't bob wire." And then he started teasing me about bob wire. He thought that was hilarious. Blaine. We always saying Green Acres to John, or we teased him about his tongue. He has a huge tongue. We're always saying, "Let me see your tongue, John." I like to tell him that if he put some leather pants on and stuck out his tongue and let us take a picture of him, we could set up a site on the internet and make a fortune. Flathead. I was running the miner the first part of the shift. Mo and I were both miner operators, and we traded off. I usually take the first part of the shift. He takes the second. At 8 o'clock I said, "I'm going to eat. It's my time." And then I went back behind the miner and sat down and ate my lunch. I had kipper steaks. Sardines. As they cut into the coal face, most of the men were aware that 300 feet or so ahead of them lay the old Saxman mine. The Saxman mine had been opened in 1923, and before it closed 40 years later, almost 4 million tons of coal had been removed from it. There was nothing unusual about operating in the vicinity of a closed-up mine. After all, Pennsylvania is full of old mines. That's one reason why every new mine has to be precisely surveyed, and why state and federal mining laws require mine operators to keep 200 feet away from any old workings. And according to the map at Quecreek, the area they were working in was still well beyond the buffer zone. But of course, no map is perfect. Every miner has stories about hitting old tunnels and other unexpected surprises underground. Often it's no big deal. Sometimes it's a nightmare. In 1959, miners were working underground near Pittston, Pennsylvania, accidentally cut into Susquehanna River. The river flooded the mine, killing 12 men and causing such an enormous whirlpool in the river that engineers eventually drove train cars into the water in a desperate attempt to plug the hole. John Unger: I don't care what the map said, I didn't like the roof. About a week earlier, I told Randy, it's really changing in here. Whatever's up in front of us, it's big. I told him we're really going to run into some bad stuff here eventually. I think how I explained it was, this place is going to turn to shit shortly. On that particular day, I was really having a tough time. It was the water mostly. We were hitting buckets of it, and I mean buckets. Hound Dog and I run the bolter. We drill holes in the roof of the mine, then throw 42-inch bolts up there and tighten them up. The bolts support the roof, keeping it from collapsing while you're working. That day, Hound Dog was killing me, man. He was dry. I was wet. That's the way it works sometimes. One side would be wet and one side would be dry. And I was taking a beating. We'd only been in there a few hours and I was soaked already. I said, let's just finish it up and go home. I'm sick of this. Mo, in a mine, conditions control everything, whether it's wet, high, low, dry, whatever. When the mine is fairly high and fairly dry, there's a good roof. I mean, that's super. But this mine at Quecreek was pretty low, about 4 foot where we was working, and it was wet. We were down on our hands and knees, you know. It was cold and wet and dark. It was a real swamp hole. The bolters, Hound Dog and Unger, get the worst of it. I was feeling bad for them. Hound Dog: I was teasing John. Hey, getting a little wet? Every time he'd drill into the roof, water would pour out. Before we'd hit maybe one hole of full pipe before this, and maybe another hole, and then it would dry up a little bit, and then you'd hit more water. But this was continuous. Every hole. It's not unusual to hit water in a mine. The earth is full of holes, cracks, fissures, all of which contain pockets of water. Usually it runs off quickly and is gone in 5 minutes. When you're hitting this much water, however, it slows everything up, and the whole rhythm of the mine is disrupted. Flathead: if we load over a certain number of tons of coal a month, we get a bonus. 1 month, we got an extra $500. So you know, we were shooting for that again, and the water was really slowing us up. Unger: we wanted to move to another part of the mine where it was drier and we could load more coal, but the bosses said, well, you've got one more crosscut to finish up. The swamp hole turned into a hellhole the moment Mo cut into the old mine. Harpo was only about 15 feet behind him, waiting in his shuttle car. Harpo: I was loaded already, turned around in my seat and ready to go. Mo was finishing loading me. Next thing I knew, Mo hollers at me. Well, I took off. I felt the water hit me in the back. I didn't know where Mo went, if he had been washed away or what. Hound Dog: I was working a couple of entries over, in entry 4. All of a sudden, the power on the bolter kicks, so that's nothing abnormal. We're standing around there waiting. Usually somebody will just run down and reset it. Within 5 minutes or so, your lights come back on, your machine, you're ready to go. So we didn't go anywhere. We're just standing there. No, not standing there. The mine is too low. You're kneeling, waiting for the power to come back on. It might have went 2 minutes, 3 minutes. I don't know exactly. Here comes Tucker running across the entry saying, we cut into some old workings. Get out. I look over and seen some water running down, but it didn't look real bad. Blaine: I heard a noise, a roar. I wasn't even thinking of the water that much. I was thinking gas. I was just thinking maybe black damp or methane. I was afraid there was an explosion. Unger: water and fire are the 2 worst things to deal with in there. I mean, you can handle rock falls, roof falls, and things like that, but water and fire are the worst. You get water and fire, you got big time trouble, man. When I heard that water, I thought to myself, this ain't good. because I knowed what was ahead of us. I knowed there was a mine up there, and we was supposed to be like 300 feet from it. I said, I know what we hit, and I told Tom, get everybody together in the feeder, where the coal is loaded onto the beltway. I told Harpo, get to the phone and tell everybody to get out. As Randy knew very well, there were 9 guys working in another section of the mine. Because that section was lower than where Randy's crew was working, the water would head down to them first, and unless someone gave them a heads up, they'd never know what was coming until it was too late. Harpo, the phone is right there on the wall, a couple 100 feet from where I was standing. The phone just goes outside to where the other crew is working. I pick it up and I'm yelling for the guys in the mains. Hey mains! Hey mains! 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 Anybody in mains? Anybody in mains? Hey mains! Hey mains! I got desperate. I couldn't raise the mains. I'm still, hey mains! 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 I decided to call outside. Outside! 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 I get a hold of somebody. He answers, hey, we got major water coming in this place. You got to try to get a hold of the mains. And just about that time, somebody from the mains answers, hey, you guys, we got major water coming in this fucking place. Get the fuck out. And I mean, get the fuck out now. I mean, fucking now. Out. The guys in the mains got the message. They immediately dropped their tools and ran. Within a few minutes, they were swamped by a mean torrent of waist-high water. But because of their advance warning, they were able to fight their way out of the mine. As Doug Custer, one of the 9 miners who escaped later, put it, without that phone call, we would have been dead. Hound dog. At first, I didn't understand the magnitude of the situation we were in. Remember, there's a lot of mined out coal below us. I mean, that probably could have held up held a couple thousand gallons of water. I figured the way the mine's laid, you'd have to go down the belt 3,000 feet and make it around the belt head and then go through a big dip. And then it's pretty much uphill to the outside. I wasn't too much concerned right at that time. I was more concerned about the long walk out that was ahead of me. We was calm. Our backs was hurting. We're not used to walking around in there. When you work in mines, you go to your machine and you're on your knees. You move around from entry to bolt or mine or whatever, but you're still not walking along much. We even sat down and took a little break there. Tucker, this mine we're working in, it's a big mine. In order for that water to get clear up to where we were, it had to fill up lots of rooms, some places about as high as 10, 12 feet. So we figured, my goodness, we have all kinds of time. The only guy who was clearly in desperate straits was Mo. After jumping out of the way of the sudden blast of water, he found himself trapped in a narrow area between the raging water and the outer wall of the mine. Mo, the bulk of the water is coming straight back through the number 6 entry, but it's bleeding down through all these crosscuts and it's bouncing off the ribs. At this time, I'm in water roughly up to my balls. At one point, I looked across and saw lights. I knew they were looking for me, but I knew what the situation was. I knew this mine is filling up really, really fast. We had very little time. I just sort of waved them off with my light. I was more worried about them guys. They got to get the hell out, you know? Don't piss around waiting for me. Randy. I went over to see where Mo was at because he was the operator and I didn't know what happened to him. When I got there, I found him standing there on the other side of the raging river of water, sort of trapped between the water and a wall of coal. The noise was so loud right there, it was like a jet engine. You could scream at the top of your lungs, but you couldn't hear nothing. I tried to tell him to work his way down the intake, and then I'd try to pick him up down there if we could get a place and slowed down. But I don't think he heard me. I mean, we both knowed there was no chance I could get him with me, and there was nothing we could do. This water was hitting the corner of the ribs and coming back around just like a big wave. There was no way. And Mo, he knew what was going on. I locked eyes with him. He shook his head. Go without me, he was saying, and I went. That's one of the hardest things I ever did in my life. Mo, I watched Randy go. That light disappeared and I was alone. There was nothing I could do. The water in front of me, it's like a raging Colorado River, just gushing. I can't breathe. I'm getting no oxygen. It's taking my oxygen. So I'm gasping. Plus you're shook up, excited. So I'm thinking, I got to calm down. I kept saying, please God, please God, please God. I can't think of a prayer. I'm not praying. I'm just saying, please, God, help me. I'm saying this out loud, so he could hear me.